Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, someone in the comments the other day said that it's worth exploring so many different avenues, especially during this time when graphics card prices are sky high, and I couldn't agree more. That's where the Quadro K5000 graphics card comes in. Now, of course, this is a workstation GPU, but I thought, why don't we take a look at a few more of these, especially as prices are so high, because who knows, there may be a few bargains among these professional GPUs. Is this one? Well, let's talk about the specs. So released in 2012, this cost $2,500 brand new, and of course it's not intended for gaming purposes. Now, having said that, it does have 4 gigs of GDDR5, 1536 shader cores, and it is part of the Kepler family, which, as we all know, are still somewhat capable of playing games and do support the latest drivers. But they do have a slight name change, so this is the 461.1 or whatever it is, Quadro driver, as opposed to the 461.1 desktop driver. I'll put the exact driver that I'm using up on screen. So these days I paid £100 for this, which, to be honest, is still cheap for one of these Quadro cards. I mean, I've seen these go still for about £200, and I can't sit here and say that you can't find other traditional desktop GPUs that will perform better for less, because you will, to be honest. It's just that sometimes if one of these is up for auction, then you could possibly find a bargain, because some people tend to stay away from them, especially if they're not gamers. Cyberpunk 2077, yeah, we're not off to a good start, let's say that. 1080p with 60% resolution scaling with all low settings here. We're averaging around 30 frames per second. Cyberpunk tends to give us problems with a lot of Kepler cards, be it workstation ones or otherwise, so 30 FPS is doable, but only with these significantly reduced settings. Mafia Definitive Edition next, again averages 30 FPS. Yeah, we're not exactly getting brilliant price to performance here, but it was somewhat to be expected. 29 FPS was the average, or 30 FPS, let's say it was 29.6, so I always tend to round it up. And the 1.1% lows were 25 and 23 respectively, so you could probably play through the game here. It feels fine at 30 FPS. It's not a first person game, and I always tend to think that third person titles feel fine at 30 FPS, but when it comes to first person games, I like to see 60. Moving on to the Outer Worlds, and this one, again at 1080p native, ran quite well with 41 frames per second. We were using the low preset once again. As we approached busier areas, the frame rate did drop to around 30. I usually don't just go around blasting everyone that I come across, but for the sake of the benchmark, this does make things a little more intensive, so I thought, why not wipe out everyone that I see? 41 FPS was the average overall, with a 1% low of 25 and a 0.1% low of 16, so there's going to be a few drops, but the game is playable for the most part. Now, when it comes to Red Dead Redemption 2, this is a tricky one. At 1080p native, 30 FPS is not going to be doable, so I switched to 80% of 1920 by 1080. I kept the textures at ultra, but everything else was on low. 22 FPS was the 1% low, and 13 FPS was the 0.1% low. And when you get near busier towns such as Valentine and Saint Denis, this is when you're going to see that lower end of these figures here. So GTA 5 is a few years old now, and as such it will perform with at least 60 frames per second at 1080p high. If you don't mind 30 FPS, then you can of course crank the settings way up and possibly even utilise some MSAA here as well, though I wouldn't recommend it. I'd recommend sticking to 1080p high, especially if you're someone who likes to play with the first person perspective. The extra frames will make all the difference. 74 on average then, with a 1% low of 53 and a 0.1% low of 50, so there were no real stutters here at all. Just like GTA, Fortnite will run at native 1080p with at least 60 FPS. Now, as always, there were some dips here. These occurred mainly when diving out of the battle bus, or sort of as you approach busier areas as the assets load in, things like that. There are a few drops, but for the most part the game performs fairly well. This was at medium settings as well, so in both Fortnite and GTA 5, yeah, the Quadro K5000 is a perfect way to play these games. It just might be a little more expensive than it needs to be, because you can find cheaper cars that will do just as good of a job, or maybe even better. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War here, 1080p and 70% resolution scale was needed in order to hit close to 60 FPS. We were just shy of that, but turning the game down any lower makes enemies pretty hard to see, which obviously isn't ideal, but if you want to go down to 65-60%, then feel free to do so, of course. Now 53 was the average here, so we were a little bit off of 60, but sometimes the game will hit 60 FPS. It's just that because of the drops that I saw, the average worked out as lower than that. The 1% low was 39 and the 0.1% low was 33, so again, not really much stuttering going on. Finally then, Watch Dogs Legion also demanding a resolution scaling drop, this time to 60%. Now 60% res scale here doesn't look as bad as it does in Call of Duty Cold War, and it doesn't matter as much because we're not trying to fight off many other enemies in a first person perspective. So yeah, it's not as bad here, that's all I can really say. The frame rate was worse, 32 FPS on average, the 1% low was 26 and the 0.1% low was 25. So just like in Call of Duty, there wasn't really much stuttering going on, it's just that the overall performance wasn't brilliant, and I think for the price of the card, yeah, it's not an overall brilliant experience. I've said that many times now, but it is sort of a doable one in some titles. Games like GTA, Fortnite, and even Call of Duty, if you don't mind a heavy reduction in settings, well, they're going to be playable. And I suppose you could say that for a lot of these games too. If you don't mind sacrificing visual quality, then you could still have a playable experience, but I think there are other options out there that are better. I was hoping that this card may be some sort of diamond amongst the dirt, you know, something hidden out there that was quite surprising, something that you could get while the prices of traditional desktop GPUs are high, that would really help you play those games with decent frame rates, but I guess this isn't the one. So on that note, our search continues. Thank you so much for watching then. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like on it down below, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.